Okay, I'm Caleb11, and we're going to talk about something that I've answered a lot of questions about in different discords and through messages of people reaching out. I just want to make a video that kind of covers it all. So we're going to cover simming and specifically simming with raid bots. Raid bots uses a backend simulation craft servers to run the simulation, so it's effectively the same as if you download a simulation craft and set up these different sims yourself manually. The only difference is if for some reason you could afford, like I could, to use more resources on SimCraft, it might be more advantageous to allocate your own resources to it. But if you're not having massive amounts of extra resources like I do, then it's better to use raid bots most of the time. There's some times where that's not the case. So the first thing you're going to need to be able to use raid bots effectively is Simulation Craft. It's an add-on. It's from the people who do Simulation Craft, and basically when you go to any sim type on raid bots, so for top gear you do have to use the actual SimC. I recommend it. For Dropamizer and Quick Sim and Gear Compare, technically you can use from the Armory, but Armory sometimes has lag time and it won't be the most accurate, and the most common sim to do will be top sim, so you're going to want the output. So if we switch on over to WoW, I'm on my shaman. Whoops. So all you do to get the SimC output is you type /SimC once it's installed, and you'll get this window, which will output the data from your character as is for that moment. So if I input this into the top gear load from SimC add-on, then you see here, so they actually added recently a upgrade budget, so you could put in how many valor you have, and it will sim things that can be upgraded by valor to give you an idea of how much you gain from that. So in here, so example, if I wanted to send my one-hander and my offhand versus this two-hander, I could do that, and you see the iterations go up. I don't have Patreon at the moment. I let it lapse. I normally do. Patreon is very worthwhile if you sim a lot. If you do anything mythic above, mythic grade or above, or high push M plus, having premium with raid bots helps a lot because it ups your total. Hold on. Sorry, I should switch the camera back. So here I was wielding my two-hander. I selected to also sim my one-hander and my shield, and the iteration goes up. So if I have nothing, it doesn't have any because there are nothing to sim against. So for every type of combination you add, the number of iterations per sim is going to go up. So if I added a few enchants, and I do replace existing gems enchants, the sim goes up because it's simming more variations of enchants. You can do the same with okay, those are all different enchants. Sorry, I forgot how many enchants there were. You can do the same for all the gems. So if you do this and you have that replace gem / enchants, it will replace any gem slots you have. So in my case, I think all my gem slots are on my lariat. And that wouldn't do much because I think it adds 10,000, but one of these is actually the gem in all mine, in two of mine. Okay, it would be replacing the gem I have. And then, wow, that's actually really cool. So it has a bunch of different, oh, those are all my talent. Okay, so it actually imports all your saved talent builds as well, so you can use you can sim different talent builds. That's actually really cool. I have not seen that one yet. That's really cool. But so, for example, if I wanted to sim all my stuff with just no verse gems, this and then these two, 160,000 iterations. You can change the stuff down here. So if you're doing it for rage, you should use all the potions, flask, food. If you're not going to use potions, you can drop potion, but that won't be a big deal. If you're trying to do it against a dummy test, you're going to want to turn off all the buffs. So for raid, you should actually have that and that and that, because those matter for an elemental shaman. But if I was doing dummy tests against myself, I would turn these off. Or if I was going to, sorry, mine's slipping. If I was going to sim dungeons, I would turn off the ones I don't expect. So I don't expect to have a monk, but I'll have a demon hunter with me generally. I won't have a druid, so I would probably go with this. Actually, I will also usually have a mage with me in my group, so this is what I would sim for doing bosses. For ads, I can't remember if Bloodlust properly turns off now. I think if your class has Bloodlust, it'll just use Bloodlust, so that'll skew some results a little bit if you sim trash. We'll cover different simming variations in a little bit. We'll just run this sim real fast so we get some results. So as you can see, it tells you where you are in queue. That's another advantage to becoming a Patreon, which is really useful as you get pushed up in a queue. Actually, if you go high enough, you can actually run the queue straight. You can do some sims, especially quick sims from like Discords, and your whole guild can use it if you're a high enough tier. But right now I don't have enough gear to require. But the more gear you're simming against, and the more variations, the more talent builds, the more enchants, the more gems. When I do things on the MDI TR realm, I want Patreon because I'm simming so many possibilities of gear and talents and enchants, just trying to find out for the scenarios I'm simming for the best possible combinations of a massive amount of different variables. So now that I'm in queue, it goes through low precision, which it kind of sims everything really fast on a few iterations, and then kind of places them in priority on if they're worth moving on. Then medium, it does the same. And then high precision, it only does a set number of variations. So it limits the iterations, but it does a higher number of iteration per set. That way you get the best possible results from the most likely to be best. So I got this back. This was simming one target on, what is this, my Dathia? I think this is my Dathia talent set. What one was I on? Yeah, I did Dathia last. So this is my Dathia talent set. And it says for the Dathia talent set, I actually would rather me have mastery gems with int mastery gem. My mastery is pretty low on my shaman right now, for fire single target mastery and haste are pretty important, so having low mastery wants me to bump that up. You can sim all the enchants like this. It's simmed multiple types of gems, and this is what it came in. It also hides things that are very close, so if I usually there's a expand. There might be too many to do that though. Oh, it might be this one. Yeah, okay. So it shows that there's a lot that are similar, and it's like, well, some of these are so similar, or they lose out so much that they're not being compared, so it narrows it down to the top and the worst, and then you can hit this to the best. So here it tells you the actual DPS. This would tell you the relative gain. So relative gain on single target would be just under 1%. So some other important things to know is Dropimizer is a very powerful tool. So if I drop my SimC in here, you can sim stuff that you get from Primal Storms, from Professions. You can sim different tiers of the gear, different levels, you can sim different stat combinations, and then it will sim through all the possible gear that 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 you could craft. It also does Mythic plus Dungeons, PvP, Raid. Very useful tool for getting an idea of what would be a powerful game for. So if you were running heroic, you could run a heroic Dropamizer real fast, and it will give you an output of which bosses will have the highest chance of dropping something really good for you. So if you were doing like a hero, well, it'd be more useful mostly in Mythic teams that have a bench. But if your Mythic raid leader wanted to be like, hey, which bosses could you get really good upgrades from, and rank the bosses that you need gear from, and you could run a Dropamizer technically and be like, from my current gear points, these are the biggest upgrades at the moment from raid. Now, you do have to think about it multi-step, because there might be something better for Mythic Dungeons than there is for raiding. You can get them either at the same eye level or almost the same eye level, because Mythic Dungeons drop at if you do a plus 20, the Volt drops at about mid-tier Mythic. So if you don't know, Mythic right now has 3 loot tiers: the early bosses, the middle bosses, and the end tier bosses. 20 Volt 20 plus 20 keys drop mid-tier Mythic bosses, so we're only a few levels under the high tier at the moment. Mythic, which is nice. It's lower in lower. So while this is running, I'll show you what it looks like after it's done. The next very useful one is gear compare. So if I load in here, what you can do with gear compare is, if you wanted to see a very specific item that you don't own, so if I type, I don't know any items I don't own, so if I type, I want something blue, so if I type Cloak of Healing Rays, I'm level 30, but let's just say it dropped at 380, and then you can, this will be named Cloak of Healing Ray 380, you put this enchant on it, and then you can sim it. So this is a way to sim gear you don't have without running a huge Dropamizer sim. It's useful. You don't really need to see it. It's just sim output. It's the same exact as of how Top Gear looked. So if we want to relook at that, another thing is at minimum making a account lets you click on this and view all your previous sim reports. So this is that Top Gear I run. So even though I closed it, I can go over there. It's saved and it opens right away. Here's this. It's showing me the expected value. So this is the average of all the drops. So Broodkeeper Diurna has 3 positive gains for me. So it's a fairly high value, and 3 of the pieces are really good, and this gives me my 2-piece, so it's worth 7.2, just like this one gives me my 2-piece, so it's 9.6. So it tells you the priority of the bosses and importance, and it tells you what the best drop is. And this is because on Top Gear we clicked relative DPS. If you unclick that, it will also just give you the flat DPS amounts to expect. So this is all simmed right now using single target, and all this is switchable, and we'll go over different sim types probably in this video. I should have time, because the only other thing I'm covering is, so this is that was Top Gear. So if I go back to sim gear compare, it's just going to list out the different gear specs that you made on there and list them out. So getting that cape at 380 would be a 1% DPS loss, just as an example. But so that's how you use Dropamizer and gear compare. And in all these gear types, what you can do is, so if I go to Top Gear, so let me load this back up. And so for single target, the standard is 1 boss 5 minutes. And then you can set things like if you have the Primal Ritual Cell, Wind, which is Mastery procs, or Flame. If you have the Whisper Incarnate rolls, you can click what they are. And they add different things based on the current tier and trinkets and other things that ring procs and stuff that are out that can affect if multiple people have them, and you can control their uptime and what they do and what they give to get an idea. So that was single target. The standard for single target is 1-5. Nightly gives you the most current APL. Weekly will give you the one that's built every Monday. Weekly is more stable and reliable. It's kind of set in stone and it goes. Nightly can sometimes have little bugs or glitches that get pushed out, but usually get fixed by the weekly, unless the nightly came out right before the weekly. But they might then push it for the weekly to fix it. It depends on what it is. But so for AoE, it's going to depend on your class and your spec. Different specs and different classes have different ways to sim. The best way to sim is to sim closest. Generally, the best way to sim is to sim the closest. So if I'm going to a dungeon and it's fortified and I'm expecting pulls that are around 8 mobs per pull, and I expect them to die around 2 minutes, maybe 3, I'd sim Patchwork 8 bosses 2 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on what time I'm expecting, and then that will kick me out an AoE result. And then if I didn't load, if I wasn't in my my AoE, I could select AoE Lightning and Wildfire, and it will sim. So we'll kick this off, and then I'll just open a new one over here while that's going. So and that's how you would sim AoE. You want to sim for what you're expecting, like I said. So if you're only expecting to see pulls maximum around 4 or 5, use 4 or 5. If you go below a minute, especially 40 seconds, if you go below a minute, a lot of those only have bloodlust up, so it can kind of skew it. But if trash is dying in less than a minute, it's probably not important enough to sim for. Usually when you're simming trash in AoE, you want to sim things that live longer, because if they die that fast, you're just going to complete whatever you're doing anyways. So it's like, does it matter? I mean, that's a personal decision and up to you, but so I'm going to cover the very controversial Dungeon Slice. Dungeon Slice was made by the Rogue TCs. It's not a bad sim, I'm not going to say that, but a lot of specs and classes don't use it. I play Elisham, I know a lot about Elisham, we don't use it. One of the biggest weaknesses with Dungeon Slice for specifically Elisham, and this applies to some other classes, but not all of them, and some classes have other reasons why they do or don't use Dungeon Slice, but the reason that Elishams don't is because the way it sims is it sims a boss for, I want to say it's 3 minutes. It doesn't say in that quick blurb. Maybe it says in more info. Yeah, it will somewhere down here. Okay, so it sims a boss for 2 minutes. Then it sims 4 to 6 mobs for 11 to 19 minutes. Then it does a cleave 1 to 3 mobs for this many seconds. It also uses Lust on the boss, which isn't a big deal. That's kind of what you would expect. Then another AoE pack for a tiny bit, and then another cleave / mini boss for a little more. So one of the issues that a lot of classes have, so for us specifically, 4 versus 5 and 1 to 3 make a huge deal with our APL, because depending on the build you're playing, your rotation as an elemental shaman can vary a lot from 1 target, 2 target, 3 target, 4 target, until you hit 5 targets, where it kind of stabilizes in AoE. And that's the other thing, is because AoE is 4 to 6, sometimes these two might both land on 4, and they actually didn't send AoE at all for an LE shaman. You're sending 4 targets, which doesn't kick in to just the full AoE. And then another issue that we have in general with it, which isn't necessarily an issue with how it does it, but most of the sim time, because it's 2 minutes and then you have a minute here and then like half a minute here, so that's 3.5 minutes. Two of those 3.5 minutes you're spending simming a boss, where in reality in a dungeon, maybe on tyrannical, that's the kind of ratio you're seeing. And this Sims actually works great for if you did BFA King's Rest. It's a great King's Rest because there's a lot of cleave, very small amount of AoE, a lot of mini bosses, and on tyrannical King's Rest, great sim for a lot of classes. But the issue is you don't spend that much time simming AoE. Most of it is on boss. Most of the boss has lust. There's just things that make people not like to use it on that. So we'll is this the, which one is this? We'll just go here and click here. So drop in monitor. Okay, well, this is the same. I think this is the AoE one we were. So for AoE, you're going to want to ask in your specs space. A lot of specs use the spec Discord. Some people don't like those. If your spec has something other than the spec Discord, that's a good place to find out about that information. Use that. All depends on the spec. Many specs are different. Class discords have different values of reliability and trust. So it all depends. So I'm not going to tell you exactly where to pull your information. I'm just going to tell you my advice for how to do this. So while this is almost done, but while it's finishing up, I'm going to touch on one more subject. I'm glad they actually removed it from the major categories. So under other tools, you'll see stat weights. I'm going to sim a single target, a standard single target stat weight, and then we'll talk about stat weights once that's finished. And I probably won't go fully into stat weights, but we will talk about it. So this is the AoE sim. So as you can see, there's 2 minutes, 8 bosses. The best town build it gave me back was the lightning build. It was, let's turn off relative DPS. It was 100,000 more DPS than the raid build I'm currently in. Wildfire for my current stats was 70,000 over. By no means, if you're an Elisham, take this to me. AoE Lightning is better than Wildfire. I don't have the best haste. I don't have the best mastery. Now, I personally don't like Wildfire, but it's a great build. If you play either, you're going to have a good time if you enjoy it. Play the one you enjoy. Don't take this as a recommendation to play one over the other. They're going to sim differently. 20,000 AoE movement's a factor. Lightning's going to drop a little because of that. Wildfire has a lot of instance, so it's going to go up a little because of that. There's a lot of factors. Stay over there, buddy. My son walked in. So, yeah. I love you, buddy. Can you go out for now? I'll come play with you in a minute, okay? So obviously it's getting later in the day and a lot of people are starting to sim for the day, so that's going to take a minute. So I'll get on my stat weight spiel now. Most theory crafters will not recommend stat weights right now, and we haven't. I say we, and they haven't, and most discords we haven't since about early Legion, and there's a reason for that. With the accessibility of move it with the accessibility of raid bots and how easy it is to sim, you can sim most of this, especially if you have Patreon. I mean, hell, I've been making this video for 25 minutes and I've already simmed like 4 different things. So it's very easy to sim. It's very quick. He sees the camera and him getting on and off. It's very easy. It's very quick, and it's very easy to get very accurate information very fast. Stat weights is a tool that was used back when simming. You had download SimCraft, you had to make your own build of it, you had to update regularly, you had to commit your own resources to simming. It's very inconvenient for a lot of people. Raidbots changes that. Can I help you? So back then, stat weights was used as the best tool that people had at the time. It's also still technically the best tool to instantly have an idea of what a piece will technically look like in gains and losses. But that being said, stat weights misses a lot of stuff because the way it's simmed is it gives you a little of each stat and sees how much your DPS increases from that. The issue is that doesn't sim stat loss, so if it's like gaining crit, okay, so here it is. So it's saying gaining mastery will be the highest DPS gain, which from a small standpoint is going to be true, and we've seen that with the gems, replacing my crit haste gems with mastery haste gems would increase my single target by about 1%. And for little stat increases like gems and food, this is actually not the worst way to kind of be like, because all that does is it, especially if you don't have gems, all it does is it throws those stats on you, and that's exactly how stat weight sims. So for those things, stat weight sims are actually decent. Now the controversy is this whole pawn string. I don't know who knows what pawn is or isn't anymore, but pawn is a add-on that you can get in WoW. When you hover over a piece, it will use this pawn string to decide how much of an upgrade that piece is. Well, pawn has every downside that stat weights has, and it's in no way a good indicator of how good a piece is going to be for you because it doesn't simulate the loss of stats from going from, so for example, my cloak is a haste mastery. If this was saying this is saying mastery and verse are really good for me right now. Probably because I don't have much of either. It's not, so if I put on a haste verse cloak, pawn would rate that really highly because, I mean, a mastery verse cloak, pawn will rate that very highly because my verse and mastery are high on the DPS gains for stat weights. The issue with that is that it's not considering the haste lost from losing my haste mastery cloak. And as I lose haste, haste will gain some value back. So haste is only barely under verse in the current ratio I'm at. So a tool that elemental shamans use at the moment, which you can see on Blood Mallet, is how most stat recommendations are made. They run a tool called Bloody Stats, which what it does is it outputs basically what I'm about to show you, which is called secondary distributions. And this is how most stat recommendations are made nowadays. Instead of stat weights, we use stat ratios. So what that means is this is the highest ratio for the build on Blood Mallet, which is, I think, the default raid build, if I remember. You can check under character profile. Okay, it's the Dre Further Beyond, which isn't the default, but it is one that's been thrown around. So the highest values for those. So a good way to think of stat rates is if you have 1,000 secondary stats. So if it says 50% haste, That would be 500 rating of haste out of 1,000. 300 mastery out of 1,000. 100 crit out of 1,000. 100 verse out of 1,000. But what this shows you is different ratios and how their DPS is relative to the best. So that's 100 because it's the best ratio. This is not the best ratio. It's at 98.8.5%. That means it's just under 2% worse. So right now, this is actually the biggest difference I've ever seen in the history of Element Shaman from best to worst. Normally, it used to be like 92%, but I think because of builds being able to build different strength, the ratio of stat ratio, DPS wise, dropped a lot. So this is something to consider. So in this case, this is the one of the worst, if not the worst. It doesn't highlight the worst because most people don't look at the worst. But this one is 84.76% below of the highest DPS value, which means it's about 15% lower if you had 700 crit per 1,000 stats and 100 of each other stats. I can make a whole nother video on stat ratios and different stat ratios, but this is kind of to reinforce the idea of why stat weights aren't used. If you wanted to do stat weights, download Pawn. It is a decent look at a gear, instantly evaluate, and think about if it could be a good upgrade or not. But definitely don't just use Pawn to gear. It's very bad. It's inefficient. Use Pawn, be like, I might need this. I'm going to hold on to it. Or, no, I can probably get rid of this. And then when you get time, come back here, go top gear, select your new piece of gear, select any enchants to replace the enchants you have, and let it rip. And that'll tell you how much of an upgrade, if it's actually an upgrade. And that's the simming basics. I hope I've answered any questions, but if there's any questions you come up with that you still have, feel free to write them in the comments. I love to help people. It's what I do daily when it comes to WoW stuff. You can find me in many class discords, especially the Elemental Shaman Discord, as well as I help out a lot in the MDI and the Raider.io Discord. Feel free to send me any questions through DMs on Discord. Write them in the comments. I'll read them and respond. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye. Okay, I'm actually tacking this on the end. This should have been around stat weights and things to avoid. Don't use Ask Mr. Robot. AMR. It's bad. It's not ASMR. It's AMR. The issue is that they do their own theory crafting. A lot of times it's bad. It's on like toxic levels, in my opinion. They don't consult other TCs. They actually lock other theory crafters that aren't part of their internal community completely out. They don't work with the SimC guys at all, unlike raid bots. This one, unlike stat weights, which I sometimes can justify for certain reasons, just don't do this one. And this is how important this part is to me, that you don't use Ask Mr. Robot, is that I made a separate video clip just to add this to the video. Please don't use it. Have a great day, everybody. This was your PSA. Bye.